What are legends made of? Was there an actual person, place, or event cemented somewhere far back in history? The stories, the tropes, our myths created after a misty event in the past, and then breaking into our reality of shared experience. If you're like me and the silken linens of your mind has been moved by the winds of Ottoman history, then you've no doubt heard of the Janissaries. What comes to mind when you hear this word? And I want to be more than mere rhetorical. Let's give it a try. I'd like for you right now to take a deep breath. Inhale slowly and then exhale, and let the word Janissary roll off your tongue. If you're feeling brave, you can use the Turkish pronunciation Yeŋiçeri. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue beautifully? In fact, I think Janissary fits more properly. It's like the vibrations from the syllables strike a chord across time and rearrange the very molecules in the air around us into something resembling a time long forgotten and lost to memory. Go on ahead, hit the pause button, and I want you to say the word Janissary quietly. Take about a minute in this exercise. Feel free to say it more than once. Let's allow the silence to sink in. Maybe you were in your car, driving to or from work, perhaps doing chores. Some listeners have emailed me and said they enjoy this show, especially while running or lifting weights. Whatever it is, I can't help but feel like the Janissary across time and space have claimed whatever sacred space you currently enjoy this podcast in. You now share this space with a fragment of the Ottoman Empire. In some philosophical way, the eternal state lives on in each of us invested in the history of the Ottoman Empire. There is this idea floating around in the philosophy of history that states that the past is still ongoing. In some strange way, the present, past, and future all occupy a singular point in existence. The different schools of history, from critical examination of source materials, narrative, Marxist theories, social concepts, evolutionist theories, etc., all point to history as a phenomena occurring outside of ourselves. History, they say, can be anchored in dates, locations, and source material, taking the form of written accounts, stones, monuments, artifacts, and so on and so on. However, since researching the Ottoman Empire in 2018, when I first started Ottoman Empire Podcast, I've had the distinct impression that history somehow comes alive in our minds in a way that could be more real than real. And that's really the key here. I believe history as a phenomena exists solely in the human mind and not outside of ourselves. When I asked you to say Janissary or Yeŋiçeri, you breathed the word aloud. I'm sure certain images, thoughts, feelings, memories of past books on the subject flashed before your mind's eye. My point being is, when I asked you to say Janissary, those images and flashes of memory and inspiration occurred in a split second, and this is where history lives. Upon saying Janissary, you experienced a historical phenomenological experience. No bullshit here, folks. The books, videos, and podcasts, all of these are mediums in which we empty the tombs of the past and allow the ghosts to have their word. The ghosts we shall be in communion with for the next several series and this Patreon exclusive will be the lost souls of the Janissaries, the slave soldiers of the Ottoman sultans. We will be casting as wide a net as possible in this seance. From their mythic origins, their strange and highly suspicious, from the perspective of pious Muslims, cult-like religion called Bektashi, their weapons and tactics, famous persons and battles. We shall trace their rise in the early 14th century, the stagnation of the imperial core between the mid-16th and 17th centuries, and their sad decline into rebellion and evil in the 19th century, and finally, their ultimate demise of 1826. The work of summoning demons should never be entered into lightly, and for this very first Patreon exclusive on the Janissaries, I'd like to lay out their origins as a starting point and a reference. To all of the Ottoman Empire Podcast Patreon members, you Janissaries and Grand Visors, thank you so much. Without your support, I wouldn't have written, researched, and recorded this episode. It means so much to me. And now I bring you Part 1, Janissary, the Empire's Elite, their origins. Anyone tangentially familiar with Ottoman history no doubt has heard of the Janissaries. The Turkish pronunciation for the fighters is in the title of these Patreon specials, Yeŋiçeri, in which Ottoman Turkish meant the new troops, or I've also seen it translated as new soldiers. On a side note, I'd like for my Turkish listeners to know that I'm making a stab at your glorious and beautiful language. The going is difficult, but also it's a little bit easier in some ways than I anticipated. Certainly easier than when I was learning Russian in college. I found the Turkish language is direct, and words deliberately seem cut short for efficiency's sake. Janissary is a beautiful word because it encapsulates two concepts. On the one hand, new troops deem the Sultan's chosen as separate and distinct from the Muslim Turkish Anatolian troops, who accompanied the very first Ottoman ruler, Orhan, as he crossed into Europe in the 14th century. In those days, Ottoman rulers weren't known as sultans just yet, but as beys. They didn't need a dedicated unit of elite infantry with unswerving loyalty. Not just yet. But then, along comes a spider. What you have just heard is a teaser for the Ottoman Empire Podcast Patreon exclusive, a brand new series on the Empire's Elite, the Janissaries. Join the Patreon for just $3 a month and take a deep dive with fellow Ottoman history buffs as we scale the walls of Constantinople, explore the origins of this legendary corps, their battle tactics, organization, strange Bektashi mystical religion, training in the Dervshirme system, and other interesting, seldom talked about facets of the Janissaries. And it's not just Janissaries we'll be covering. I've got exciting things planned out for our Patreon exclusives. Everything from collaborations with other history podcasters to deep dives into Ottoman personalities, events, myths, and so much more. Don't worry, the main show's narrative will always be 100% free, and I absolutely love rewarding my Patreon supporters this way. The show's primary narrative will be roughly 2 episodes a month moving forward. Okay, I don't want you to miss out, so head on over to the Ottoman Empire Podcast Patreon. For just $3 a month, you can hear the rest of this episode streamed via RSS link on your favorite podcast listening app. You will find a link to the Patreon in the show notes, and I hope to see you over there.